I was running a fishing program when I worked as a ranger at a West Virginia state park. Sometimes on my off time, I'd go out on my own and test new equipment and different types of bait. I was out there one day checking out a stream I was unfamiliar with. I had just got my pack off and found a spot to sit when I had the odd feeling of being watched from behind. I do typically trust those gut feelings of something being wrong or sensing some unseen danger, so I got up and moved downstream about 500 yards. There was a spot where there was a larger clearing between the river and the taller brush and trees. I didn't see or hear anything unusual while walking over there. There were some old deer tracks in the dried mud, but no signs of other animals. When I got to looking for a spot to sit, I got that weird feeling again. I could see pretty well all around me, and I couldn't figure out what was setting me off. I ate some of the food that I had brought and watched the area around me while I tried to figure out which lure to use. The feeling seemed to subside for a while. I fished for about an hour without catching anything, and then I had to answer nature's call. So I stood up and walked back into the bushes to take care of business. While standing there, that feeling came back stronger than before. It had gotten really quiet all around me. There were no birds, no wind, no critters of any kind. I walked back to my spot. As I got there and bent down to pick up my pole, I heard this rustling in the trees behind me. Instantly, every cell of my body was keyed up. The area I was in was known to have bears and bobcats and cougars, but I hadn't seen any sign or heard from anyone else that there had been any sightings in a while. When I heard the rustling again, I slowly turned my head around and was shocked to see something huge perched on a lower branch of the tree behind me. It looked like a huge bat-like creature, covered in black feathers. It became very still and looked at me with these terrifying red eyes. What the hell? I thought to myself. I reached for my bag. I wanted to get my gun because I had no frame of reference for what this was or what it was capable of. As soon as my fingers started unclamping my bag, I heard a loud whooshing sound. I looked up and saw the creature had unfolded two massive wings. Underneath the feathers, it had a skinny, human-like body. I was stunned as it stared at me with those eyes that glowed like reflectors. It let out a screech that sounded like it came straight from hell and flew off amazingly fast. You wouldn't think something could move like that from a still position. It seemed to go from 0 to 100 instantly. I grabbed my stuff and packed my bag as quick as I could. I put my pack on, and even though the thing had moved away and was out of sight, that feeling of danger was strong as ever. I started back to my truck the way I came in and froze after a few steps. I couldn't go back the way I came in because that was the direction the thing had flown. I stood there and listened and watched for about 10 minutes and heard nothing. The river was running slow, so it hardly made a sound. I looked all around me, and every time I looked back up the trail I had come in on, I got more and more nervous. The trail looped around a different way back to my truck, but it was about a 2-mile walk versus the 3/4 of a mile that I came in on. I decided to take the long way. When I got to my truck, something had been there and scratched it up pretty good on the driver's side and on the roof. I was parked on gravel, so there were some scuff marks all around, but no discernible footprints. That feeling of danger did not go away until I'd driven up to the top of the ridge and was just about to get back on the pavement. When I got to the intersection in the road that led to the pavement, there was a game warden and a deputy sheriff parked there. I knew the warden. They were kind of blocking the road as I pulled up, and they got out and walked over to my truck. The conversation started normally. I told them I'd been fishing with no luck down at the river. When I mentioned the sighting in the tree and the fact that my truck had gotten all scratched up, They got quiet. They asked me what time I had parked and which way I went up or down the river, and if I'd actually seen anything around the parking lot. I told them I only saw the thing fly off and didn't see it again. They looked at each other again, and the deputy took down my information. All this made me feel even more paranoid than before, but they weren't giving out any information if they had any. They said, "Okay, have a nice day," and moved their trucks off the road. I definitely decided to leave that stream alone and stick to the old fishing spots I've always used. I didn't get any updates from the warden or the deputy. I really wish I had more information. I was volunteering as a camp counselor on a really nice lake in upstate New York. I loved camp when I was a kid, so I figured it would be nice to give back. Hanging out with the youth of today and seeing what they were all about seemed like a fun way to spend my summer before going back to college. Part of working at the camp is showing up early and getting everything ready for the campers. There's a lot to get ready. You have to bring in all the supplies like food and first aid stuff. There's all kinds of activity stuff, sports equipment, you name it. A lot goes into providing for hundreds of kids over a summer. It was my job to get the water activities set up. There was a lot to do. I was sort of surprised that they expected me to get it all done by myself. The van was full of bags and cones and buoys and a bunch of other stuff. I dragged bags of stuff to the lake and put everything in order. It took like 10 trips. The sun was setting and dusk was settling in. It was going to be dark soon. I thought it was time to hurry up and get this done with. I was pulling out all the rope for the boundaries when I noticed something in the water. I saw splashes and ripples. Figured it was just fish playing around. It was a lake after all. I ignored it and got back to work. A few minutes later, I heard a big plunk, like someone had thrown a rock in the lake. The ripples were bigger this time, and they spread along the surface of the water. I looked around to see if someone was messing with me. A practical joke played on the new counselor or something, but there was no one around. The sun was behind the trees now, and it was getting colder fast. The hair on my arms was standing up. I looked out at the water again. It seemed almost black now. I realized the goosebumps on my arms weren't only because I was cold. I was feeling nervous being near the lake alone. I shook my head and told myself I was being ridiculous. And then I heard the splash again. I looked up, startled. I saw something going under the water. I caught it for only a second, and I wasn't sure if it was a big fish or something else. Then I saw it again, pushing its head up through the water. It sat there like an alligator. Just the top of its head was exposed. The head was long and slick, but scaly. I rubbed my eyes, literally not sure if I was hallucinating. But there it was, whatever it was. I didn't know what to do. I heard when you see a bear, you're supposed to make a bunch of noise, or maybe you're supposed to stay quiet and back away. I couldn't remember. But it felt like it was a threat. The head was pointed straight at me. The head came up. First, I saw the long snout emerge. It was like a weird alien lizard, black and shiny and slimy. The eyes were the most horrifying part. They shone like they had their own lights inside of them. The thing rose out of the water and kept rising. It stood up on 2 legs and stared at me. It looked like the creature from the Black Lagoon, like I saw on TV when I was a kid. But the head was long and freaky, like a deformed alligator. Its arms were long and thin, and on the end of each were horrifyingly long claws. They were shiny and yellow. It looked at me, and I swear to God, I thought it was grinning. It had row after row of crooked, sharp teeth. Its right leg took one small step forward, and my body took over. I threw the ropes I was holding and ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction of the lake. I tripped and flew forward and almost knocked the wind out of myself, but I got up and kept running. I hid behind stacks of kayaks we had for campers. I caught my breath and snuck my head around the side to look back at the water. The thing just stood there. It wasn't moving. It just stood there. I thought about yelling for help, but I was afraid the only thing that would come running was that monster in the lake. I heard the sloshing in the water. I waited another minute and took one more look. I kept praying it was my imagination, but no, it was there. It looked closer to the shore now. I had to run. I turned and took off again and headed towards the main lodge area. I hoped all the other counselors were there. While I sprinted as fast as I could, I turned over my shoulder to look back at the lake. The monster was lowering itself down. It was slow and methodical, staring at me the entire time. I kept running, and when I turned to face where I was going, I saw a counselor ahead of me waving at me. I bent down to catch my breath. He asked me what I was doing. I took a deep breath and took one more look back at the lake. It was completely still and flat. There was no sign of life at all. He asked me again if I was okay. I told him I was fine, that I saw something in the lake. He asked me what. I couldn't tell him the truth. I was too afraid of sounding crazy. I just told him it was nothing, some fish or something. He looked at me like I was a little crazy anyway. And that's why I'm sharing this story now. I need to know that there are other people who have seen something like this. I need to know I'm not alone. My dad is a cattle rancher out in Colorado. I don't work with him anymore, but I do go out there and visit every once in a while. His ranch is pretty remote, out in the San Juan Mountains. It can be hard to get out there, especially in winter. Nowadays, I work in Austin as a financial analyst. Most of my work actually has to do with the agricultural industry, since I'm so familiar with it. I've never been a super imaginative person, which I guess fits the industry well. It's all about numbers and rational decisions and maximizing returns. My dad also is not very imaginative, which is good when you live in the middle of nowhere. It's good to have a steady mind that doesn't come up with crazy scenarios when emergency services are only available via satellite phone and will take 3 hours to get to you. The lack of imagination is really why I believe this story my dad told. He would not have come up with something like this on his own. He never, ever made up stories, not even for bedtime or around the campfires. If he told a story, it was from a book or something a friend had told him. Nothing new or original ever came out of that guy's head. But this story was new, original, weird, and kinda scary. So it was weird to hear it coming out of his mouth. He seemed to believe it when he told it too. His eyes, they didn't lie. He called me and told me this story a few weeks ago. It's been on my mind ever since, and I've been wondering if others have seen or experienced similar things. This is why I'm putting it out here. Maybe somebody has seen something similar. He said that it was all in the behavior of the cattle. My dad has a very large herd of cattle spread out over multiple pastures and barns. It's like a cattle empire almost. He knows their behavior well, what's normal and what's not. He's been doing this for 50 years and he's seen it all. Based on what he said though, I think it's pretty clear that what these cattle are doing is strange. Even if you weren't a 5-decade expert in cow behavior, you'd know that this isn't right. He said it occurred over several days. He said that he first noticed it in the morning when he went out to start doing his chores. He said it was really obvious that something was up. All the cattle were pointing towards the north. It wasn't like they were all walking north, and that's why they were facing that direction. Nope, according to my father, they were all just standing, facing north. All their bodies were parallel to each other, almost as if they were an army in ranks. My father said that when he went to walk among them, trying to figure out what was happening. He said that they seemed totally normal. They weren't sick or distressed. They were all just looking in the same direction. He said that over the course of the day, some of them stopped. They seemed to snap out of a trance and become their normal selves again. But some of them remained, looking towards the north, unable to turn away. My dad said maybe the cows knew a storm was coming or something. Animals can sense that sort of stuff and react to it. He didn't know, but he tried not to think a lot of it. The next morning was the same thing. He got up and all the cattle were pointed to the north. Even the ones that had become normal again were facing north once more. He said this happened 6 days in a row. He'd wake up and all the cattle were facing in the same direction. Over the day, most of them would go back to normal, but by the next morning, they were all turned in the same direction again. It was on the 7th day that my father said things got really weird. That's when something showed up in the pasture. When my father went out after the 7th night, there was a giant rectangle in the field. There were no markings on the grass, no lines or burn marks or ditches or anything, but the cows were avoiding it. The cows had a giant rectangle-shaped hole in their herd with perfect right angles and straight lines. It was like a crop circle, but in the middle of a herd of cows. And it was a rectangle, which made it extra unexplainable. If it was a circle or an oval, maybe it would have seemed less weird. But cows don't know what a rectangle is, and they certainly don't know how to form a right angle. My dad's convinced that there's something unnatural behind this cow behavior. He thinks that they're aware of something we weren't. He thinks that maybe something visited his pasture and made the cows afraid of that rectangle area in the field. My father also thinks the cows knew it was coming. Like a storm, they could sense it in the air somehow. That's why they'd been pointed towards the north for so many days. They were waiting for it. My father counted and no cattle were missing. He had the exact same as before. After a day or two, the rectangle broke apart and filled in. The cattle weren't being influenced by whatever that invisible visitor was. Like I said, my father doesn't have a great imagination. That's why I believe him. I believe that he really saw his cows acting this way and couldn't explain it. Both of us have no idea how to explain it.